Hey everybody, welcome back to the Tango Banter. We are launching into our 31st episode. My, how time flies. Kind of crazy. I remember like it was yesterday when I walked my very first feeble steps into this whole exploration of podcasting, and a handful of you were kind enough to compliment and encourage me, and here I am still doing it. And I gotta say, I'm having a really good time. And I just met one of my listeners last week at a milonga, and they said, "How often do you do these podcasts?" And I said, I do one every week. And she says, "You do one every week? How do you come up with the topics?" And I was like, yeah, I know. Exactly. How do I come up with all these topics? Honestly, right now, it's kind of random, and it just kind of comes to me from different sources. And a lot of those sources are conversations that I end up having with you, my listeners. Some of the great topics that I've gotten recently have been from just messages that someone sent to me. So all of that is to say, I encourage you to reach out to me with your ideas and thoughts, because you help me to continue digging into this topic of tango and being a social creature pursuing a strange activity filled with mystery and strange etiquette. So just today, actually, I got a request to talk about cologne for men, and what I would recommend for cologne, which might not be a great topic for a podcast, but great topic for some of my activity on other social media like Instagram and Facebook. So consider this my formal invitation to you to check out my channels, because I basically treat them as my other ways that I can share and impart whatever helpful wisdom that I've gathered over the years. So I do a lot of video posting and demos and talking about posture and such. So my Instagram channel and Facebook both are I'm So Tango. That simple. So would love for you to check them out and follow if you choose. And today we are launching into one of my very favorite topics. And this is one of those topics that once I get going, it's kind of hard for me to stop, because it has been the very fabric of my personhood for the past few decades, and that is teaching. How to choose a teacher for tango. How do you choose a good teacher for you? I think a lot about this topic, being a teacher myself, and I was having this conversation at the Milonga last week with another teacher who, like me, said, I just end up teaching everything I learn. And I am pretty much like that. I think that I love many things, but teaching is the highest form of love for me, because to teach something is to look for that perfect way where there's like a construction of a bridge from the consciousness of one person to another. And there's such an art to it, such an art. Everybody's so different. And what I've learned over the last couple of decades of teaching is that there's so much bad teaching out there. And unfortunately, most of us are too nice and too maybe too doubtful of ourselves to be critical of that teaching. We might automatically think it's because we can't learn well. I know I've felt that throughout my education, almost all of my education. I felt like I was really struggling, even though I was excelling, even though I made the grades, but it was very hard. And then I just realized I learn very differently. I have a very different learning pattern that I've had to kind of discover on my own. So finding a good teacher for tango is pretty important. Sometimes that's the sort of the deciding factor whether somebody stays with tango or leaves. And it's also a deciding factor, perhaps, how far the student might progress. So I know that I've gone through many questions about teaching as a teacher and as a student. So this is why I really have a lot to say on the topic. I've been teaching professionally since I was in high school. I just started teaching something. I taught yoga for many years. I've taught meditation. I was a university professor in art. I have 2 master's degrees in fine arts. So I was teaching art history. I was teaching painting for a while. There's a lot of experience there, mostly working with people who are older, not with kids, but at least college age and older. And when it comes to movement in general, I find that there's a lot of tendency to anticipate and expect that everybody who comes into a movement class is going to be at the same level of understanding. And this happens with tango a lot. That you might have people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they don't necessarily have experience with movement. Maybe that's just not part of their lifestyle. They don't necessarily work out in a gym or go to yoga. And they come into a tango class, and all of a sudden they're expected to learn very strange movement patterns and be aware of their body in a whole new way. They have to deal with balance, and it can get really frustrating. So having a good teacher is really important, and being able to know what you're looking for and sort of be responsible for your own decision to work with someone. It's a very empowering place to come from. It took me a long time to get there. I always kind of put teachers on a pedestal and really felt like with every teacher, I was just aware of how much more work I have to do. And maybe you feel that way right now. But really, if we kind of change the perspective a little bit and realize that we're all dancers, movers, skilled to a certain level, and we are looking for someone to help us get to that next level, rather than we are uneducated, aspiring dancers who are looking for somebody to give us the minimum or the maximum that will make us worthy or good enough to be on the dance floor. There's a very 2 different ways of thinking about it, and I definitely was in the former category for a long time, and I chased different teachers and put myself through the ringer only to realize that it was possibly unnecessary. But, everything is relevant in the long run. So today, I'm going to give you some pointers as to what kinds of things you can ask yourself when you're deciding to work with someone, what kinds of teachers you have available to you in any community. There's a pretty standard range available, so I'll talk about that. And I'll talk about some of the considerations I have when I think about working with people, especially when it comes to movement, because teaching movement is very different from teaching any other kind of material. And of course, that's true for any field, but especially tango, I say that tango is passed down through the body, ultimately. And people relate to that. You have to feel it from the other person's body. And it's a beautiful image to think that tango as a dance is like this physical thing that almost like the way oral stories would be retold through oral tradition, tango is a dance that survives through touch by one person passing it down to the next person. So when we're dealing with something like this, it's, people connecting through touch, and then you realize that concept of, just touching someone and moving with someone can bring up so many conflicts and difficulties and emotions. And, suddenly it's not just about taking a step back or a side step. It's not just about learning a pattern. You have all these other things. And so what is the role of a teacher? Is it just to show you the moves so that you're able to walk and navigate? Is it to impart a set of traditions and so that it's preserved, right? Is it to guide you in terms of your mindset, how you interact with other people, and teach you how to be in a social setting, right? It's all of those things, right? It's a little bit of everything, and every teacher excels at different things. For me, the way I define teaching and what I look for in other teachers is I see my role as a teacher is to empower the dancer, right? I perceive everyone who comes to me to work on their dance as a dancer, as a fully developed dancer in their own right at this moment, and this is where they're at, whether they're a beginner or not, but they're a dancer. And my job is to empower them to go in the direction of what they want most. That's what I'm here to do. So whatever that takes, whether that's one session with a little bit of advice, or whether that's 6 months of weekly work, it's like, where is the dancer heading? What do they want? Right? So as a tango teacher, I really want to do everything I can to make sure that the dancer continues dancing for as long as possible, for as many years as they can, right? So whatever that means for that person is going to be different. But that's where the art comes in, right? So as a teacher, it's like I am fishing for the right thing for that dancer to have what they need to continue. That's how I perceive the role of a teacher. But it's important that you understand what's important to you as a dancer. So the first question to ask yourself is, what is your goal in dance? And I've thought about this question so much that now it's a little bit mundane for me. But I remember the first time somebody asked me that, and I literally was amazed that I had never even thought of it before. And I actually just had a session with somebody who came to me for the first time, and I asked them that question, and they too did not have an answer, really. You know, to say that you just want to dance well, or you want to, you know, make sure that your posture's good and your vocabulary, like, that's not really what you want. Like, what is it that you really want? What is it all for? Why do you need to know all the vocabulary? Why do you want your posture? Well, it's because I want my followers to feel good, or my leaders to feel good. I want more people to dance with me. Now, okay, you want more people to dance with you. What else, right? Like, what is the thing that's being wanted? Where are you heading? And when I tell you the options, you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it, right? It's not that difficult. To me, there can be really two major goals. One is a professional track, or some sort of performative track. You enter tango and you have a deep desire to perform, to be on stage, to learn choreography, to work with a partner, to find a partner, to be in a troupe, dance troupe or something. Like, that might be the kind of dancer you are, and you want that. Then the other category is you want to be a good social dancer. You want to be able to go to any milonga, any marathon, any festival, and have a good time. You want to feel confident that you'll go anywhere and that you'll be fine, right? Like, for me, that's really what I wanted. Although, you know what I said when when I first was asked this question, I thought about it for a couple of days, and in all seriousness, I said, I want to dance like Juana Sepulveda. If you don't know who Juana Sepulveda is, she's the partner of Chicho Frumboli, who is a legend for many reasons, and one of the most influential dancers for me in my development as a dancer. And so Juana, to me at the time, was the ultimate dancer. I wanted to look like her. I wanted to move like her. And that's really, you know, that was all I could say. But then later, I really kind of realized that that's not enough. You know, it's like, sure, you can get all that technique. Like, that's actually not, oh, it feels like it would be this amazing achievement. But once I got to a place where I felt like more or less my dance resembled the thing that I saw in Juana's, not that I at all look or dance like her, because we're very different in our style, but there was something in me that was like, okay, I feel like I'm in the vicinity, and I kind of like don't really care anymore, you know. So at that point, that's when I was like, so what is it that I really want? And what I really want is, you know, to have that freedom to go to any milonga, any marathon, any festival, walk in and just know that I will have a good time. I will be able to dance with the dancers that I want to dance with, and I don't feel intimidated. And even if I do, that I can, you know, manage it. So that's the kind of thing that I want. And I'm sure that all of you fall into one of these categories. Either you want to do the professional track, or you want to do the social track. And, you know, one of them is more specialized, the other one's more general, right? So I was told this early on, that, you know, you can choose to pursue being specialized, but that means that you will have a smaller pool of dancers that you will enjoy dancing with. Your technique will be more specific to a particular style, perhaps. So it will, you know, it will make you be a little bit more specific in who you dance with, and just your exploration of the dance will look different. Whereas if you choose to be more of a general dancer, you'll perhaps not have the same technical refinement. You won't have the same, I guess, perfected look of the dance, but you will have adaptability of mechanics, and you'll be able to dance with a larger proportion of people. So those are perhaps the two extremes, and maybe you find yourself somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit of both. But the question to you is, if you're choosing to work with a teacher, is what is my goal? Because the teacher can only teach themselves. This is something I say, and it's kind of a funny statement, but I cannot teach anything that I don't know. So when you consider a teacher and you consider your goals, right away, you should see if there's alignment there. Because, for example, if you were to come to me to work on some sort of stage piece choreography, or you want to learn very sophisticated vocabulary for a choreography that has lifts and such, like, I'm not the person for that. That's not my forte, right? I am a teacher for social dancers. I'm really interested in mechanics, alignment, posture, longevity, health. So if you are a social dancer who is having difficulty with certain movements because you're losing your balance, or you're struggling with your posture, or you're frustrated because you find that you dance with certain people, but then you can't quite dance with higher level dancers, and you know that, there's something mechanical going on, like, I'm the person for that, right? Like, that's where I excel. So I would be a good match for somebody who is a social dancer, whose goal it is to dance anywhere with as much freedom as they want, right? Like, that's what I love helping people to do. But if you're a dancer who's looking to be a stage performer, or you really want an aesthetic, you want to partner with somebody and perform and create choreographies, you would want to find somebody who excels at that, whose dance you really enjoy and you love what they look like, because you will look like them. It's kind of inevitable. It's, this is one of those things that you kind of have to realize, that when you choose a teacher and you watch them all the time and you mimic their behavior or their movement, eventually you start looking like them. The way in my mind I eventually looked like Juana. My aesthetic, I kind of saw my movement and my style develop more and more along her lines, and that happens just by interacting with them. And just like, teachers can't teach what they don't know, you want to acknowledge that. You want to acknowledge that they'll teach you what they know, but they can't tell you what they don't know. And you want to be sensitive to that. So if you are studying with someone, and let's say you have a particular issue that's beyond the scope of their expertise, which happens a lot. There's a lot of teachers in tango who really know the dance. They might really understand the structure of the dance and the sequencing, but they might not know anatomy and mechanics. So they might describe to you and be able to explain to you the pattern of movement, but they might not be able to tell you why you're losing balance. So if you ask them and, you are not getting a satisfying answer, you're not getting the right wording, you're not understanding, it's not working, don't think of it as like, oh, it's because you're just kind of dumb and you don't get it and you just need more work. A lot of times it's because it's beyond the scope of their understanding or their knowledge, And maybe they're explaining it in a way that doesn't work for you. So that's just one instance to consider, that they can teach you themselves what they do, what they practice, but you can't rely on them for everything. That's why I'm saying it's important to be clear on what are your goals. What is it that you're wanting to achieve. And so this kind of leads me to this kind of other aspect, last aspect, is there's a difference between knowing the dance and knowing movement. And there are a lot of people in tango, a lot of teachers who really know the dance. They know how to teach the dance. They're very well versed in this thing called Argentine tango. But they might not be, or they're not, so well versed in anatomy and mechanics. And that becomes important based on where you're at. Because if you're a beginner who is just diving in and you're learning the basics, you're learning the sequencing, then really it makes no difference, right? You will gain so much from learning from someone who really knows tango. But once you pass a certain point and you're dealing with more subtlety and you're coming up against obstacles, that's when somebody who knows movement and mechanics can be really helpful. So sometimes it's hard to find that. It's hard to, maybe you're in a small community and you don't have teachers who do both. And in that scenario, I would encourage you to reach out to some other movement practitioners. Look to maybe some yoga teachers, Pilates, or gyrotonics, or any other movement that would help you address the problems from a different direction. Because once again, to circle back to some of the issues that happen when people who are going into tango later in life and they don't necessarily have a background in studying movement in other traditions, you have this double whammy of requirements. Like, you have to learn the patterns and you kind of have to figure out how to balance and how to transfer weight and how to articulate through the joints, and there's a lot there. So don't feel like, oh, it's just because I'm not good enough that I'm not understanding it. Tango is very, very sophisticated, in terms of the requirement of what you have to integrate. So I do want everyone to feel accomplished, even for just dancing tango. You might not even dance it very well yet. Maybe you're just beginning, but do feel a sense of accomplishment, because it's kind of an evolutionary leap to even be able to do that. Most people in the world can't. So at least that, take that as a little bit of a badge of honor there. A special consideration, I think, must be paid to your role as a dancer, and whether your teacher knows and practices both roles equally, or whether they primarily do one over the other. For example, if you are primarily a follower and you go to study with a teacher who's primarily a leader, there's going to be a gap in understanding, because there is a little bit of a disconnect between where you're starting from. And even though the teacher who leads might know following moves, if they don't also follow regularly on a social dance floor, they won't really know the following role as intimately as you know it. And so what might happen, and this happens a lot, I've heard stories upon stories about this, where as a student, you might not understand what your teacher is saying. A good example of that, like the leader might just tell you, relax, just relax. And you're like, what do you mean, relax? What does that even mean? That's one of the common ones. So in the mind of a leader, they're giving you something specific. It's specific to them. They understand it from the leading role, the way they feel it in the follower. But they can't jump into your role and feel it from your body and understand how they need to say it in order for you to understand it. And same vice versa. So it's quite common for us to seek advice from teachers of the opposite role. And it works to a certain extent, but when it comes to more subtlety and more detailed anatomical and mechanical understanding, a lot of times there will be this disconnect. So always my advice for those who are looking to resolve issues, troubleshoot some things, overcome plateaus, and kind of get to that next level of dance, look for teachers who practice both roles equally. Those teachers know the most, just by virtue of practicing both. And, for me, for a long time, I was primarily a follower, and then I kind of knew how to lead. So I could kind of teach both, but the following was really primary for me. When I started leading regularly, that's when my understanding and my ability to explain concepts really became more effective, and I got more success with students. It's because I just really knew it from both sides. That's why I keep talking about learning both roles too. So you want to be mindful of that if you're learning just the basics, it's fine. You can benefit from either studying with somebody who's primarily a follower or a leader, and they know, the basics. But if you're dealing with something more complex, something that requires more understanding, or you're looking to advance to the next level, then you really want to look for a teacher who practices both roles as equally as possible. So you see them dancing both roles on the dance floor. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground here already, and I want to now make some suggestions for you to develop this ability of discernment. I've been thinking about this word a lot, and whenever I mention it, people are like, what's discernment? And discernment is this ability to discern, to judge what is appropriate and what is not. And I think every single person would benefit from developing discernment. And that word, it might seem kind of complex, but really in this context, it's the practicing of asking the question, what is best for me? What is it that I need for my dance? What is the next best step? Right? Who is the best teacher for me? So it's very selfish in this scenario. I'm really trying to point that to that feeling of asking the questions that you think you're not ready to answer. Because for some of you, you might be beginners and you might think, well, I just need to learn to be on my balance. That's all I need. But no, I want you to look to the end result. What is the end result that you want? Do you want to go on a tango cruise for 2 weeks and dance with people from around the world? Do you want to be on stage? Do you want to DJ? Do you want to be a teacher down the line? Like, who knows? But be clear with that, because I think that really helps you identify the best teacher. Because there's so many out there. And I have to say that if you don't clarify that, if you do what I did, probably what will happen is you'll get overwhelmed. because there's so many teachers, and everybody has their own way because everybody teaches themselves, and you'll get conflicting information. And then it's like it's hard to decide who to listen to, and it becomes very confusing. So there's nothing wrong with that, actually. It can be that. Maybe, you need that. You want to just sample and go around. Maybe it's not time for you to answer those questions. But I think if you're choosing a teacher to study with over a period of time, and you're wanting something more, you really want to dive in, then it's good. It's good to ask those questions. So let me tell you what I think about when I'm considering working with somebody. So first, the thing that I look at when I'm thinking about choosing to work with somebody is their movement. So if I'm going to be working with somebody on my movement, the first thing I look at is their movement, and whether, first of all, if I like it and it looks integrated. That's something that I've developed over the years. I kind of know what to look for. And then I also listen to how they talk about their movement, how they talk about their body. And that's something that I learned over the years from working with lots and lots of body workers, is that if you have somebody who talks about their body in a negative way, or they complain a lot about things hurting, their back, their knees, or they're complaining about being tired or stressed, to me, that's a red flag. Because again, I think, like, when I'm working with somebody in terms of movement, I'm taking on this person's patterns. I'm taking on their energy. And if they are complaining about, their knees hurting, to me, it's like, I don't know if I want that. So that to me is a big one. I also listen for their understanding of anatomy, and that's not something I'm gonna drop in as a first question when I meet them, but it's something that I kind of gather from conversation, and I want to get a sense: do they understand some of the basic principles? Do they understand mechanics? And sometimes if I hear them describe something in a way that doesn't make sense, then to me it's like, okay, so this person, they might know this, but they don't know this. So I know that I can come to them for different things, but maybe not this specific thing. So again, something I want to make sure I'm not conveying is that any of this is negative or positive, like good or bad, that teachers should be this way or that way. Everybody's different. Everybody has a very specific expertise, so it's more about whether you as a person match with what that teacher has to offer. So for me, for myself, certain things are important, and I look for those things in teachers, but that doesn't mean that other teachers are not just as good, so I just want to get that out of the way. Another thing I look at is style. Styling is a very important part of dance. It's not something that we talk about very much, but I feel like every social dancer, as an artist, as a developing artist, should at some point learn to develop their own style, to have their own aesthetic. It's a very fun and exciting part of learning to dance. And one way that we learn aesthetic is by mimicking it in our teachers. So when I choose teachers, I assess, do I like their styling, the way they dance? I tend to be a very social, kind of more relaxed frame dancer. So my favorite dancers, Ciccio Fromboli, Horacio Godoy, and this is for leading. For following, Ariadna Naveira is the person that I really enjoy. So those are some of my influences. Those are the people that I want to emulate. And so if I'm looking at the teacher and their style, it will impact whether I want to study with them or not. The other thing, these two last points I'll make are sort of more personal. It might not apply to everyone, but I'm just putting it out there as something to consider. How much does the person actually teach? So it's pretty common in the world of tango as well as other movement areas like yoga or Pilates that teachers will teach many hours in a row, and they'll teach 10 privates back to back. To me personally, that's a red flag. Partially because nobody can sustain that amount of effort and still retain energy, retain their freshness. I mean, it's physically impossible. So sometimes, if I hear a teacher really talking and complaining how much they teach, it's like, to me, it becomes sort of like a question about boundaries. Why are they teaching so much? Is it because they can't say no? And that's a big one in the body world, like body worker world. Big red flag if you have a body practitioner who just runs their body into the ground in the service of clients. Like it doesn't work. So with the teacher, to me, I love when teachers have boundaries and they value their time and they value their self-care, and they say no. They're not available all hours of the day. They don't, there's not like that crossing of boundaries with them. I appreciate that about teachers. And so if I talk to a teacher and it's a little bit more of this attitude of teaching as much as possible, really trying to get more students, or taking on more than they can handle and complaining about teaching 10 hours a day, that to me is a little bit of a red flag. However, sometimes that's necessary because it's a visiting teacher. They're coming in and they're teaching 2 days or 3 days. In that case, honestly, I always try to schedule early on, or as early in the day as possible. If you can be first, or maybe not first, but like second or third, that's the best, because you want to catch them while they're still fresh. And I should say us, right? Like me included. I tend to be very particular how many sessions I teach. I typically won't teach more than four or five sessions in one day is probably the most I can handle, because I really want to provide my full presence. Like, I don't want to be snoozing in the embrace. Sometimes I hear teachers say that. They're like, oh, I was so tired, but I just closed my eyes and I kind of snoozed in the embrace during the lesson. Like, I feel like that's a disservice. So if I'm in that state, it's not fair. It's not what I am there to do. So I want to be empowered to convey empowerment to the other person, right? I want to have boundaries so that my client knows how to have boundaries. So it's kind of something I really pay attention to. And the last thing I'll say is, I pay attention to price points. And with tango, unfortunately, historically, systematically, tango professionals are underpaid. They're undercharging, and it's a bigger issue that I don't want to bring in now. But even though it's tempting to take advantage of a lot of teachers who are charging very little, I tend to now go towards higher price point just because I want that teacher to get paid what they deserve. And them charging more means that they don't have to teach as much a lot of times. Whereas somebody who's charging, $50 or $60 for a session has to teach many, many sessions. And that's a separate issue that I have a lot of beef around, because I myself have had to learn to operate at a different mindset, because as a yoga teacher and as a tango teacher, it's so easy to undervalue the work. But, when you go to a physical therapist and or a doctor or somebody who will help you overcome some sort of physical ailment, it's expected that you pay for that service, and that it's not free and it's not low cost. It costs, right? And tango teachers, I mean, we are definitely of that level of subtlety when it comes to the presence that's required, and the attention and the care that we put into the work definitely is on par, if not more, than a physical therapist. So I tend to want to work with body practitioners and other dancers who, charge a fair price for their time, which in tango, it can vary from place to place. So I don't want to throw out a number because it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. I'm fully aware that $50 or $60 is actually a really good rate for certain communities. It really depends on where you're at. But I think you know what I'm talking about here. So there you go. That was a whole lot to share with you. I'm curious if any of this resonated with you. I'm eager to hear whether you have some other considerations or thoughts that you've come to value when you're choosing a teacher. I think I want to create maybe a list of considerations and post it somewhere just for people to have access to. And when it comes to body mechanics and those more subtle layers of understanding of movement, and looking for somebody, for some resource that helps you understand those aspects of movement. I shared this before, but I have a free course that's available for access to you, and the link is in the show notes. I think there's 22 videos that cover tango mechanics from the feet all the way through the shoulders. So lots and lots of careful, methodical breakdown of body mechanics of those areas. So if that's something that would be helpful to you on your journey, I hope you enjoy this as a gift from me to you, as a little token of empowering you to pursue all of your deepest, biggest tango dreams. 'Cause really, so much of our limitations and our stagnation is just because we think that we don't deserve to have what we want. And I'm here to tell you, it's all there for you for the taking, and you just have to answer those questions. What do you want? What's your goal? So yeah, we'll leave it at that. That's a good one. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll chat next week at the next Tango Banter.